the TMZ Behind the Bar podcast with the TMZ lawyers, Jason Beckerman and Derek Kaufman.
Hey, everyone, and welcome again to the podcast where every week we talk about the legal issues surrounding the biggest stories in celebrity news. I'm Jason Beckerman.
And I'm Derek Kaufman.
Derek, a lot of stories we report on the TMZ generate clicks. You got to think like Donald Sterling, Mel Gibson rants.
Yeah, good video content, good audio.
A lot of videos, think Ray Rice or the Solange and Jay-Z fight. But I don't think any story has ever generated the amount of disagreement, strength of opinion, controversy as Colin Kaepernick refusing to stand up for the national anthem.
Yeah, you sit down during the Star-Spangled Banner and people start talking.
They really do. So the whole universe of, at least the TMZ universe, and I think the universe at large, beyond just...
How large are we talking, Jason?
We're talking,
writ
the
large,
universe.
Milky Way.
Right.
Yes.
Is talking about Colin Kaepernick, his refusal to stand, his desire to take a knee during the national anthem. Certain other players have followed. It hasn't quite taken off like I thought it might.
No, a few people have done it. Chris Brown did it. Chris Brown sat during a charity basketball game, and others are following suit. I think it's catching some fire, but it's not widespread.
But everyone does have an opinion on this, and Derek and I have gotten a flurry of emails to Behind the Bar at TMZ.com, sort of on the one hand asking whether or not the NFL or the San Francisco 49ers could potentially suspend or fire or in some way discipline Colin Kaepernick for his activity. And then on the other hand, we get a ton of emails as well saying that isn't what he's doing protected by the First Amendment? Isn't he allowed to do whatever he wants? And shouldn't the NFL, 49ers, the Players Association, and anybody else just stay out of it? And so it was the second issue, I think the First Amendment issue, that we really wanted to delve into.
That piques our lawyer.
It
Our little
really
lawyer
does.
antenna just go dart up.
That's right. So, but Derek, before we begin, I think we can both agree that what Colin Kaepernick is doing, although he's not speaking, it still is protected by the First Amendment, right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, speech we call it free speech because that's the way the amendment is written, but it really encompasses any form of communication. You can communicate with a fist in the air like they did in the Olympics, a sort of Black Power salute. Yeah. You can communicate with money in politics. That's considered speech. Yeah. So really anything.
Right. Quiet sit-ins at universities.
Sure.
Those
Silence.
Sorts of things. Silence can actually be a very powerful form of speech, and those are protected by the First Amendment. You don't have to speak in a lot of different contexts because you're protected from doing so by the First Amendment.
Art is a form of speech.
So then does it follow that the First Amendment would protect Colin Kaepernick against being punished by the NFL or the 49ers or the Players Association for refusing to stand during the national anthem?
No.
No.
Not at all. So, the NFL is a private league. It's filled with private team owners associating themselves to play football in a league.
Right.
Those guys can fire Colin Kaepernick. They can suspend him. They can bench him. They can do a whole host of things because there's no abridgment of his freedom of speech. He can speak as he will. He can kneel during the national anthem. He can't be arrested for it, but he certainly can be suspended or sanctioned by the league.
So really quickly, let's go back a couple hundred years. You have the Bill of Rights, obviously, in the First Amendment, in the Bill of Rights, the First Amendment to the Constitution talks about the abridgment of the freedom of speech. And what it specifically says is that Congress shall make no law which abridges on the First Amendment. That's a summary of what it says.
Yeah, it's a biggie. There's some religion stuff in there, free exercise clause, but we're going to talk about speech today.
We're going to talk about speech. So Congress shall make no law which abridges on the freedom of speech. But you got to focus on that. It doesn't say that no person shall have their speech abridged upon. It says that Congress, and now it's been interpreted later on to apply to the states, but government shall make no law which abridges the First Amendment rights, the freedom of speech of individuals.
That's right. Those first 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights of the Constitution, are there to prevent the government from becoming too powerful and encroaching upon the rights of citizens. So they laid out a bunch of rights in those first 10, and they said you can't go too far. They have rights as ordinary citizens to not be abridged by a big, nasty federal government or a state government.
Right. We saw this all the time.
Speech is big.
Speech is big.
Yeah.
We saw this all the time in the Duck Dynasty case. Remember Duck Dynasty?
I remember it very well. I remember their beards. I remember their duck calls.
You worked on this story like crazy.
I really did. So there was a lot going on with Duck Dynasty. You remember, these are a group of conservative guys. I believe they're in Louisiana, and they had some very strong views against gay marriage. And A&E, the network, said, we don't want people with those views on our network, and suspended them. And I think the show's been canceled, as a matter of fact.
The show has been canceled, but they were certainly, whether or not it was because of the speech, we don't know exactly, but they were certainly suspended as a direct result. And there were a lot of people that came out and said,
people were quacking.
This is ridiculous. What A&E does is infringing on their First Amendment rights to state their political opinion that there shouldn't be gay rights or gay marriage in this country. And A&E said, rightfully so, we're not subject to the First Amendment. We can do whatever we want. And that's true for all of us. We are employees of someone. We're employees of TMZ.
Yeah.
And if we say something, whether it's in the privacy of our own home, on Twitter, on Facebook, or certainly in the context of our job, and our employer doesn't like it, they can fire us for it. They can discipline it for us, and we can't resort to the First Amendment.
That's exactly right. And what's weird is there was an outcry, Jason. We were in the newsroom, and there's this persistent misconception, this fallacy that the First Amendment protects you and gives you an entitlement to a certain type of job. It absolutely does not. For the most part, if you work for a private company, you have no protection. If you wore a yellow shirt and Harvey said, I don't like dudes in yellow shirts, get them out of my office, bye-bye, Jason.
Yeah.
We'll collect your belongings and we'll turn off your key
card. And it goes even for core. If it goes even for core speech, if Harvey didn't like the fact that I was gonna back a certain presidential candidate, he could fire me for that. I do not have any rights whatsoever under the Constitution as it relates to TMZ and Harvey Levin.
That's right. If he doesn't like that you join the Elks Club, you're gone.
But you made a very important distinction between a private employer and a public employer, and I think nothing brings that into starker relief than the case of John Tortorella, who is the United States Olympic hockey coach. John Tortorella announced that if any of his players kneeled during the national anthem, they would not stand during the game, meaning that if you kneel during the national anthem, you may as well stay kneeling because you're not going to play in that game.
Now we've got a problem.
John Tortorella, as the coach of the U.S. team, the U.S. Olympic teams are quasi-governmental. They're actually sponsored by the United States government. They are
You're
funded.
repping the United States. You got USA across your chest. You're not a member of the Eagles.
That's right.
You are at
that point a state actor. If any of John Tortorella's players were actually to kneel, and then he were to say, but for that, you would have played, but I'm not going to play you because of that, they would absolutely have a lawsuit against him. They could get injunctive relief against having him discipline them in any way for them having spoken out, exercised their free speech rights in this way. He is a state actor. He is sanctioned by the United States government in his job. He's hired, in fact, or as a point of fact, by the United States government. He has no right to discipline somebody for the exercise of their free speech.
Right, and this is not the only context where you see what Jason is calling basically a state actor. As coach of the USA team, he's basically a government employee, and he doesn't play by the same rules as a Harvey Levin running TMZ, who's in a private entity. So this also comes up a lot in the context of public schools, right? Public schools, they're all around the country. You've got teachers, and they're trying to run a facility where they're educating the youth.
Right.
And when they're there, if you come into school and you want to just spout off at the mouth and say whatever you want, it is protected to a certain extent in schools, right, Jason?
It's protected by a certain... So in private schools, they can absolutely restrict anything you say. You can only talk about how God is great in a Christian school, for example. You can only talk about, back Donald Trump in a conservative university. BYU has certain restrictions on what its students can do and can say because of its Mormon mission, and the purpose of the school is to the pursuit of the Mormon faith.
What if I want to sit during the pledge?
Yeah, certainly. In the public school, you can sit during the national anthem. That might be a statement, a political position that you're taking. You have the absolute right to do that, as long as, right, we've talked about this a little bit, as long as it doesn't distract from the educational mission of the public school. There are certain restrictions that you're allowed to do basically what you want. As soon as it begins to distract from the educational mission, however, then even public schools can start to encroach on your rights to say and do things.
Right, so that's interesting. I mean, if you wear a black armband and you want to protest a war, you're not really distracting any other students. You're sort of making your protest with something that is not too loud and disruptive to the class. But if you come in with a shirt that says, F the police,
right,
you are now distracting the other students. You're sort of riling everyone up. I think the school could step in and say, you can't wear that. That's vulgar. We have an educational mission here. We want to keep a clean campus for the most part. You can't wear that shirt.
And now we were talking about employees. We have teachers and principals at public schools. There are restrictions placed upon them of what they can say, even in their private time. We saw this with Trey Songz recently. It was about a year ago now.
That's exactly right. A woman, a New York assistant principal, appeared in a Trey Songz video. And obviously, if you're in a Trey Songz video, there's going to be some alcohol, there's going to be some scantily clad women, there might be some drug use. And she appeared in the video in full regalia, maybe.
It was sort of a house party type of situation in the video. You guys have seen, if not this video, a million just like it, where you have sort of a house party, there's women walking around wearing next to nothing. She wasn't wearing next to nothing, but she nevertheless took part in this video.
That's right, and she was reprimanded by the school because when the students in this age of social media sort of saw that she was in a Trey Songz video, it created a little bit of a hoopla. There was a stir around there, and the school said, this is really distracting from what we're trying to do here, you being in this video, and you're going to be scolded for it. They can reprimand you for your association outside of school.
So she was disciplined for that, and she said First Amendment, and the school said, I'm sorry, you are distracting from the educational mission here by appearing in this video. And I think they really had the stronger case. It didn't go anywhere. She sort of took the reprimand, took the discipline, and went on. But I think they had the upper hand in that argument.
I agree.
So these really are tough standards to apply. It's very difficult to know, especially in the public school context, what is it that distracts from the educational mission. If a student is wearing a pro-Donald Trump shirt, for example, and if the rest of the student body doesn't really care, they're likely not going to be distracting from the educational mission. But if they wear it, and every time they wear it, there's a fight that breaks out on the quad or whatever it might be, that is going to start to detract from it. And the state would, or the school in this case, a public school, would probably have the right to step in and say, look, you can't wear that shirt. You got to wear a sweatshirt over.
Now, what if the Hillary people want to wear their Hillary shirts, though, and you say no Donald Trump shirts because that seems to be riling up the crowd, but everyone who comes in with their pro-Hillary shirts, how does the school really address that? Because then it starts to seem like discriminatory.
What Derek's doing right now is he's trolling for law school commentary, right? So this is something.
Did I find pay dirt?
You found pay dirt. So this is the whole viewpoint discrimination. The state can often restrict free speech. We're going to get into a little bit more of that going forward into times that restrictions on free speech are allowed. But it's never the case that you're allowed to restrict speech on one side of an issue and not while you're not restricting on the other side of the issue.
Yeah, the school would just go across the board to sort of keep it clean and simple.
Right. So that's one exception to the First Amendment. You must have a state actor in order for the First Amendment even to be called into play.
But that's the only limitation, right?
But there are other limitations like anything else. I mean, we all feel it intuitively when you have the Second Amendment right to bear arms. The right to bear arms is not absolute, despite the desire of some Americans. The right to bear arms is not.
We can do a whole podcast on the second if you want.
We really can.
We can walk through the amendments. Send us your questions.
The right to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures in the Fourth Amendment, it's not absolute. There are certainly times the police can seize your property or break into your house in order to stop a crime while it's being committed.
The right not to quarter redcoats.
The old Third Amendment.
The old third.
Right.
Still in the books.
So all of these, every amendment in the Bill of Rights, and subsequently there are now 27 amendments that have been passed to the Constitution. Every amendment has limitations that come with it, and some of the others that you may be aware of in the First Amendment context, in the freedom of speech context, are the old fire in the crowded theater exception.
The
right?
classic. Shouting fire in a crowded theater.
Right. So, somebody shouts fire in a crowded theater. There's a stampede that goes out. Somebody gets hurt. The individual is arrested for doing so. The individual says, hey, I know there was no fire, but I was just exercising my First Amendment right of free speech. 1919, in a very famous case, the most famous Supreme Court justice of all time.
Probably up there, yeah.
Oliver Wendell Holmes says, no. Anytime that your actions create a clear and present danger, the state's rights in protecting its citizenry trump the First Amendment for a very short period of time in a very limited case, but they can trump the right to speak as you might otherwise.
Now, remember, this was falsely yelling fire in a crowded theater. If there's an actual fire in the crowded theater, feel free to chime in and let others know so that they can run to safety. Even if you create a little panic, if there's actually a fire, you can yell that.
You can yell whatever you want. You can yell run, scram, whatever, get out of my way.
Right. But everyone...
Did you ever see that Seinfeld episode? You're not a huge Seinfeld guy.
No, I'm more of a Simpsons Family Guy.
When George is trying to oppress a girl and he goes to this thing and then a fire breaks out, and his desire to save himself, he pushes old ladies and children out of the way in order to
I enjoy it. It does show your true colors. There's a new movie, Force Majeure, where a guy's true colors are shown in a similar sort of event, and he pushes his family down to save himself. That is the
first and last time Force Majeure will be used.
First and last time. But it's interesting. Clear and present danger comes from that case. It's not Tom Clancy. So if you really like Tom Clancy movies, he borrowed it from Oliver Wendell Holmes.
Just to be total dork, Oliver Wendell Holmes coined a ton of phrases that have been used that you guys know, and clear and present danger being first and foremost.
It's a good one.
That was a good movie, by the way. I like that.
It's excellent. Oh, yeah. Tom Clancy.
Fantastic movie.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Oh, we've woken up Parker with a little Tom Clancy talk.
Clear and present danger to my heart over there, Parker.
So this is actually related somewhat to. So fire in a crowded theater gets you also thinking about inciting a riot more generally, because the problem with falsely shouting fire in a crowded theater is that you create a panic and people get trampled. trampled.
Right.
Similarly, inciting a riot. If you get a crowd riled up and you say, "Hey, rush the stage," or F the police and trample them, that can get you in trouble. And it actually got Travis Scott in trouble in August 2015 when he urged a crowd at Lollapalooza to rush the stage. He egged them on.
And
he said,
they did.
Everyone. And they did. And
Yeah.
so they trampled over barricades. People were, hurting in the dust up. And it's dangerous. It's dangerous. And so he was arrested for disorderly conduct. And it's a species of a limitation on free speech. You can't egg a crowd that's all amped up to do that.
Right, and this is the case. If you encourage a violent act, if you encourage people to storm the White House, obviously the people who storm the White House are going to be arrested for trespassing and destruction of property and maybe threatening the lives of people, but also the person who stood on the soapbox and screamed at them to go and do it. He or she can also be arrested for having incited the illegal activity. That is an exception to the First Amendment.
It's always troubled me, and I won't dwell on this too long, but the people who actually storm the stage when you are told, storm the stage, ultimately have the decision whether they're going to do so. But the law still punishes the guy who said as well.
Yeah.
Because if I go out and I say storm the stage, no one's going to listen to me. But when Travis Scott in the middle of his set does it, the mob tends to follow.
That's right. So, but one sort of weird example of this is Scooter Braun.
This
right?
is my favorite story. Jason reminded me of this. Go ahead.
So Scooter Braun there was a mall, a bunch of people had showed up to see Justin Bieber at a mall, I believe in Minneapolis. Is that where they were?
Yeah, back in 2010. So there was a mall run by
right.
young believers. This was at the height of his teen mania,
That's right. And so the police come upon, they've got to, get all these little teeny boppers back to where they belong and get them out of Justin Bieber's face. And there's some destruction of property. And what do the police do? They arrest Scooter Braun, not because he incited the riot or encouraged anybody to break property, but simply because he hadn't stepped in to try and stop it.
That's right. The cops asked him, you need to send out a tweet that tells these believers that the event is canceled so they'll go home and stop wrecking this private
property. And Scooter
property.
Braun said, I'm not going to do that.
I'll do no such thing. I will not shout at the believers.
Right.
And he got arrested.
He did.
There's a mugshot of Scooter Braun for not stopping a riot.
So he was arrested, he was booked, he was mugged. And now the charges were eventually dropped against Scooter, and we don't really know the circumstances of that, but probably nothing. He just sort of waited his time in jail and was eventually released. Right. But I think the police would have a really tough time making these charges stick. I mean, it is one thing, we punish, for the large part, acts of commission when you do something illegal, with you incite a riot or you actually do the rioting. We very rarely in this country punish acts of omission, things you should have done but decide not to do. Those are very rarely punished, and when they are, they're often found to be unconstitutional.
That's right. It's a more awkward fit to say that he had a duty to stop a riot in some way. And even though speech, we mentioned in the beginning, could be silence, this kind of silence is hard. It's a tough sell to convict someone on this type of charge, saying that they didn't stop something that was already underway.
That's right. So that's fire in a crowded theater is one real clear exception to the First Amendment right. To speak.
Incitement of a riot, fighting words are in that category as well.
Right, and then you have obscenity, which is something that we all sort of have an idea of what that is. But
finally we got to obscenity.
We got to obscenity. So the Supreme Court, believe it or not, has been very clear that if speech can often be the artistic creation of, or the creation of an artistic work, making a pornographic video, for example, that is covered by free speech unless it is deemed to be obscene.
But how do we make that determination?
Well, a much less famous justice by the name of Potter Stewart came along and he said, you know what? I know it when I see it.
Which is my favorite tautological standard. I know it when I see it. When I see it, it's porn. You just have a feel. He didn't want to set a specific standard. He just said, we'll look at all this stuff, and on a case-by-case basis, I'll tell you what porn is.
So the justices, and it still happens to this day, I mean, Ruth Bader Ginsburg takes, I'm picturing old VHS tapes, because she hasn't quite mastered the art of the DVD, no less like a thumb drive or something, and she takes them down into her basement, and she has to pop these VHS tapes into her VHS recorder, her player, and watch these things. I'm being silly about the
Often
VHS
awkward.
thing.
No. I have it on good authority. I know many Supreme Court clerks. That's what they do for obscenity cases. They watch the obscene material to make the determination on VHS. They watch it with their clerks. Justice Clarence Thomas, same thing.
And so, based on the evidence, if if a majority of judges, or if it's at a lower case, if the judge feels that the type of video that it is exceeds the social mores of the community, they are allowed to actually declare that obscene and arrest the person who created the video. But it is happening less and less. Back in the 50s and 60s, when this law was developing, you used to see it all the time. People would be arrested for violating social mores, for obscene conduct. They would say First Amendment. The courts would say, too bad, you've exceeded these limitations. But these, over the last couple of decades, couple of generations really, have been chipped away to the point that the obscenity laws are basically basically rendered meaningless except in one very specific context.
Yeah, they're mostly dead letter. I mean, you get really extreme cases with what's called crush porn. There were famous cases where people were crushing heads of animals with high-heeled shoes, and that even passed muster as not obscene.
Yeah.
So they're looking for any. They don't want to judge what is artistic and what is not in most situations,
That's
and
right.
see what's purely appealing to
Basically,
the
the
base interest.
market will dictate, for the most
That's
part,
right.
what people consider to be art, what they want to see, and the justices of the Supreme Court have said the government needs to get out of their way
Jason,
and let them do it.
We live in a world of cake farts.
That's
we
right.
live in the cake fart world. But there is
What
one
is the one big
category. The
exception?
one big category that we still all agree on is child pornography. I mean,
Right.
there's harm to children, that whole interest, and nobody thinks that it has artistic value, separate and apart, or in any way close to the harm it does to society. And
Yeah.
the mores, I think, will be there for a long time. Probably bestiality is in that realm as well.
Yeah.
But child pornography is really the hammer. I mean, that's why Jared Fogle and guys like that get in so much trouble.
So I'm sure a lot of you are saying that we didn't realize that the First Amendment had anything to do with child pornography, but the truth is it has everything to do with it. Because back when these laws were being enforced, every defendant to these cases would stand up and say, no, I have a First Amendment right to do it. If you're going to say that an adult has a First Amendment right to pursue their art of creating adult pornography, I similarly have a right to my art, and my art is child pornography, and therefore I have an absolute right to do this. And the courts have said no. What the court is doing is balancing interest. The harm to children is so grave that it overcomes the First Amendment right that people might otherwise claim. We've seen this in the clear and present danger context. The harm to the individuals exceeds the benefit that you're getting from exercising your right. A couple of more very quickly. Untrue statements. Defamation is a classic case.
It's a big one we think about all the time.
Right.
Jason.
You say something false about somebody, you know it's false, you're trying to injure them. You might say, hey, I have a First Amendment right to say what I want to say. The courts have said, no, you don't. If you say it and you know it's false at the time that you say it and you cause injury, then you are going to be found to have defamed that person. You are not protected by the First Amendment.
Right.
Fraud is another one. You purposefully lie to someone in order to get them to engage in a business transaction with you. You take money from them. You might say, I have a First Amendment right to say what I want to say. Courts have said, nope, if you're trying to defraud
If you're
people
lying
out
to
of
people.
money.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, so truth, it sounds like is the ultimate defense, and it really is. It gets you pretty far most of the time. But we
Yeah.
were thinking, is truth ever not a defense? And Jason came up with a great one,
Well,
and that's extortion.
Extortion, yeah. If I say to Derek, I have these pornographic pictures of you, and if unless you pay me $1,000, I'm going to release these on the internet. I'm guilty of extortion. My speech is true. I
Right.
have these pictures.
You are going to
I
release these to the public.
I intend to the public.
Public. No, it would be true. Jason does have these nude photographs of me,
Yeah.
and he does intend to release them if I don't pay him a large sum of money. He's not protected by the truth of that statement. But I want to bring this all back to Colin.
Do you really want to bring it all back to Colin,
I
or
do.
do you just want to go on about what you found? Fun facts about the national anthem.
So I said, Jason, you have to indulge me. So Colin Kaepernick, of course, is kneeling during the national anthem. So the first thing you think about is that illegal? Well, there's actually a law in the books. 38 U.S. Code, I believe 301, is the national anthem law. And it tells you, it prescribes exactly what you're supposed to do during the national anthem. It says, during the rendition of the national anthem, persons present should face the flag, stand at attention with their right hand over their heart, and if applicable, if you have a hat on, remove your headdress and hold it over your left shoulder so it's kind of over your heart. But what do you do with a law like that?
Is it a law? It's actually, this has been passed by the legislature and signed by the president. This is a law.
It's a law on the books, but what we call in a fancy jargon, it's a hortatory law rather than a mandatory law. So this says what you should do.
Right.
This exhorts you to behave in a certain way, but there is no penalty. There's no sanction for not doing so. So sitting during the anthem and not following this, you can't be punished, but it is a law on the books, so he's doing something technically illegal.
Yeah, and it's really important. The reason this is a hortatory law is because the people who passed it realized that if they were to pass it as a mandatory law, actually prescribe certain conduct, it would so quickly be declared unconstitutional
Right.
that it would just fall by the wayside. So they wanted to do something symbolic, which they've done, about how you're supposed to treat the flag. There's all sorts of other things that I've heard.
Oh yeah, there's Pledge of Allegiance law. There's
Yeah.
there's a treasure trove of them, but none of them are ever enforced, so they're not challenged and they remain on the books.
I remember as a kid, I was at my Little League field and I lowered the flag down and the tip of it touched the ground. And my father insisted that I should burn the flag.
Major faux pas,
And
yeah.
I thought, wow, what a waste that would be to burn the flag. It was accidental. I didn't mean to do it. But in fact, and then they tried to pass laws saying it was illegal illegal to burn the flag.
I know, but all of these run so afoul of that very important First Amendment that they don't dare enforce them because they'd be struck down immediately by a federal court.
Derek, I just heard something.
Oh, what is that, Parker?
That's mail time.
Oh, I was hoping for a Tom Clancy novel.
Maybe later.
All right, later.
Don't forget to write in your comments and questions to behindthebar@tmz.com. First one up is from a YouTube comment from Lit Circle. My only question would be how the two even entered the situation with no one intervening or saying anything. She mustn't have walked outside with him at some point, or was she dragged? It's a missing link in the story to me. This is, of course, talking about Brock Turner.
This is talking about Brock Turner, right? You remember him. We talked about him last week, the Stanford University student and swimmer who was convicted of raping the young woman outside of a party on campus. Yes, she must have walked outside with him at some point. I mean, I can't. That's undoubtedly true.
Yeah, there's no one who says she was dragged out, but I think you and I feel differently. Regardless of whether she walked out with him, I don't think she was ever in the state of mind to at that point to engage in consensual sex. You and I think may disagree.
I don't disagree. I think that's probably absolutely true.
She's close to passing out.
I just was talking about from a purely forensic point of view. The prosecutor has got to go through their paces and prove each element of the crime, and I think it renders it difficult in that she doesn't remember what happened. But this guy raped her, and I'm glad he was convicted, and the punishment certainly doesn't fit the crime.
Yep.
Next one up is from Jeremy. I can't imagine defending Brock Turner in this case would be where a lawyer would want to be. Have either of you ever had to defend someone or something that you did not agree with?
Oh my.
Oh,
so many
course.
times. Yeah, if you're a lawyer and you don't defend someone unsavory, you're not doing it right. I mean, that is just the nature of the business in large part. The defense.
I mean, Derek and I weren't criminal defense lawyers. We practiced business law in different facets, and so we represented corporations. And because of the law firms we were at, we represented very large corporations, and large corporations are never clean. I represented some really terrific corporations that I would stand behind. I would stand behind all of them to a degree, but some of them are accused of doing bad things. I represented for some time the tobacco industry.
Yeah.
And it's not that I didn't believe in the defenses they were putting forward, but it doesn't change the fact that they have a checkered past in terms of the truthfulness of their comments and that sort of thing. But as a lawyer, I mean, to Derek's point, you're sometimes put in difficult positions of having to do things you don't want to do.
Yeah, look, I represented the financial services industry after the mortgage collapse, and although a lot of the things they did or they were accused of doing didn't align with my personal beliefs and interests, I'm able to compartmentalize. I think a lot of good lawyers are able to do this and just treat these as academic exercises without such a personal investment in them. Now, you have to behave as though you're personally invested and you're outraged that the things are being accused of, but it's different. It's more of an exercise for me.
And just to tidy this up from my perspective, you can tell me if you disagree. I really do believe in the system. I really believe in the American system of justice, and I really do believe that Brock Turner or Charles Manson or whoever it might be has a right to have somebody stand up for them and speak on their behalf. Say whatever it is they have to say. Brock Turner, I guess, believes that he didn't rape this woman. He has a right to have somebody not just stand up for himself, but has a right to somebody to do that on his behalf. Charles Manson thought that he was inspired by whatever deity or whatever it was. He has a right to have somebody there to stand up. And if I was put in a position where I was a public defense lawyer or if I was privately retained, I hope that I would be in a position to say no when I really thought that the individual was unsavory. But that would be my choice, and when I felt that it was necessary to defend this person, I would step up and I would do that to the best of my ability. Once you take on that burden, you better pursue it to the full extent.
That we agree fully. I mean, there's a popular canard that people say, would you defend Adolf Hitler? It's always the go-to, and Alan Dershowitz, a very famous lawyer from Harvard.
Jewish lawyer at that.
Famous Jewish lawyer from Harvard, said yes. Yeah. I always say it with a caveat. I think Adolf Hitler would deserve a defense, assuming he's an American citizen and he's in our system of justice. However, I wouldn't defend Adolf Hitler. I believe that I wouldn't a certain suite of skills to the table, and he doesn't deserve the defense from me.
Right,
that's just my
But I also don't judge Alan Dershowitz for the opinion. I think that every lawyer has to make their own decision about who they're going to defend, because people certainly judged me for representing Big Tobacco. Honestly, people sometimes judge Derek and I for working at TMZ. Some people who have a hang-up with it. They're all, we get that sometimes.
That's right.
And I fully disregard that, and I honestly don't think it's an informed opinion when they have it, but they have it.
I ignore it. Yes, but that was a meaty question. Whoever sent that one in, we were really chewing on that, Jay.
Thanks, Jeremy. And lastly, from Andy M., I find these really interesting.
Oh, and Andy,
I think
we find you immensely interesting.
I
as
would
well.
like to personally invite Andy M into the studio.
Oh boy,
I think that's such a wonderful comment.
Yeah, that was a great comment. Thank you. We find it interesting too, and I hope you guys do. Hey, one thing I didn't mention at the top: please go to the Apple Podcast Store, to SoundCloud, download, subscribe,
Write a
listen,
review.
Write a review. We'd love to hear what you say. We'd love for ideas for future podcasts. We are all over it. Thanks very much.
Thanks.
Thanks for watching. If you want more nerdy deep dives into the legal side of celebrity news, hit our subscribe button right here.
And check out our previous episodes over here.